tell us about, from your vantage point, what are you seeing in terms of M&A trends in the passenger side of things, given very challenging season through COVID coming out, all kinds of disruption and erratic type rates as part of that recovery. What are you seeing right now? What are you seeing driving M&A?
Well, right now, M&A is driven by, as you know, rate cuts and interest rates and the overall big picture of what's going on in business. But I mean, I think the pandemic really redefined things in many ways. When folks were presented with the challenge of the first time of having absolutely nothing to do. The transportation companies, as you know, Spencer, like many of our businesses, but in particular them, they're operational. So the owners never really focus on succession planning and other things or taking vacation because there's always something going on. Those folks having a complete ground stop was a point in time where they didn't know what to do with themselves. But when the PPP came out and a lot of the relief, it forced them to tighten their belts, to shed unnecessary vehicles, to kind of maybe get rid of some of the employees who weren't performing as well. So I think that belt tightening, when we came out of the pandemic, led to a lot of M&A activity, especially on the asset side. Like, when things started ramping up, people had shed a lot of their assets and employees, and they couldn't actually even handle, Spencer, the business coming back right away completely. I don't think after the pandemic, any of these companies could have handled a complete return to 100%. So some of the companies started, believe it or not, and a lot of the deals we were involved in were smaller companies just looking to buy a couple of buses, and they couldn't buy some buses on the open market. So they would actually acquire a company to get their vehicles. So we've seen a little bit of that activity, which started during the end of the pandemic and coming out of it, it slowed down a little bit. The industry is not back to where it is, where it used to be. I mean, from 2023 to 24, we're seeing that the bigger companies are doing better. Most of the large operators are above 60%, 65% of their revenue, but the smaller companies aren't doing as well. The smaller ones are, below 48% or 40% of their operating revenue, and some of their revenues have also been flat year to year. But overall, the bigger limo companies and bus companies are doing better than the smaller companies, which still creates an M&A opportunity ultimately. If the capital markets remain tight because of high interest rates, then we can expect more M&A activity. But it also is business travel and working from home impacts these industries too. And I think we're kind of stuck where we are. We're not back to where we were before. And I think that there could still be opportunities, but it could very well be more tied to people looking to decide what they do now, as they age and they start to. Many of these are family-owned businesses, and people are starting to think about the future. Because the pandemic caused a lot of people, Spencer, to think about their life. How busy they were, and how they finally had a pause to think about things, and they're starting to do some succession planning. And M&A is part of succession planning too. I mean, it's an option, right? So I'm not saying that there's going to be a trend of developing from that, but we need to keep an eye on the overall economy and business travel to figure out what's going to happen. But things have settled down a little bit. But that doesn't mean that there's not going to be deals coming. There's just going to be less of them. There was a big flurry of activity coming out of the pandemic, and after people tried to right size their businesses, some people folded, some people went out. The bigger bought some mid-sized companies and so forth. And I still think you're going to see some strategic M&A going on, but it's going to not be as much in the coming months. But we'll see where it goes after the election.